Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Melissa Ridgen, and today we are putting a massive miscarriage of justice in focus. APTN broke a story last year about two Saulteaux sisters in Saskatchewan doing an insane amount of jail time for a crime that they didn't commit back in 1994. It was the murder of an elderly white farmer near the community of Keeseekoose. Well, the investigative documentary on APTN Investigates called Life Sentence explored how Odelia and Nerissa Quewezance were trapped by a system that seemed hell-bent on keeping them in its grip, right from the beginning of the investigation to now, almost 30 years later, which kind of reminds me of another Canadian industry that profits on Indigenous folks, the child welfare system designed to snatch and keep people in its grasps because it does such good for the Canadian economy. But that's a whole other show we'll get to a different day. I just like to rant when I have the opportunity. Back to the Quewezance sisters and their case. You know, we've got reporters, two of the reporters who've worked on this story. Our friend John Murray from APTN Investigates unfortunately can't join us, but Holly Moore is here. She worked on the story with John back in 2020. And then she's here today. Now Kathleen Martins is here today as well. She has been doing kind of the updates on this in the past few months. So that's excellent that they can both join us. Some incredible developments that we're going to talk about today that maybe could help some other Indigenous inmates who've been victimized by this system and, you know, makes a living off of severe overrepresentation of our people in this system. We also have a retired judge joining us and a lawyer who is fighting for these Quewezance sisters to be free. This, of course, is a call-in show. If you've got something you want to add about innocent people doing hard time for crimes they didn't commit, you can certainly give us a shout. Our toll-free number is 1-877-647-2786. Obviously, you can't come on here and say that somebody else is guilty of a crime unless they were tried and convicted. You can say somebody's innocent, but you cannot come on here and say, you know, Joe Schmo did it. First, let's refresh our memory with a clip from A Life Sentence. Odelia and her sister Nerissa and their 14-year-old cousin had gone partying with this old white man who was trying to pay the girls for sex. Take a look.
Anthony Joseph Dolff, aged 70. Murdered in his Saskatchewan farmhouse over $700.
I didn't do it. I didn't kill him.
Odelia Quewezance admits she was there in 1993 and incarcerated since. But she insists she didn't kill Dolff.
I honestly believe that I should never been charged for second degree. All these years I found it in my heart that this was too much of a long sentence, and I was just a young lady that didn't know.
Odelia Quewezance had just turned 21 in 1993. She lived here with her younger sisters, Nerissa and Nerissa. Keeseekoose First Nation. A Saulteaux community, about 4 hours east of Saskatoon. Joe Dolph's farm was 2 miles up the hill from the reserve. It's long gone.
He said, we're going, somebody's gonna come pick us up, and I said, don't go, you know. I feel something bad's gonna happen, you know, stay home with me. Yeah.
Nerissa stayed home, here in this house where they lived back then. Odelia and Nerissa met up with their 14-year-old cousin, Jason Kashane, who lived just across the road. Nerissa didn't see her sisters again until the next morning.
And then they came to the front door, knocked, and my younger sister, Nerissa, had walked in. I sat in the living room with her, and she was just crying. I said, well, what happened? And then she said, he's dead. He's freaking dead. She said, hey.
Nerissa wasn't at Dolph's. She didn't see anything. But Odelia did.
It's a little bit of an APTN Investigates reunion episode of In Focus here, hey? Holly Moore and Kathleen Martins and I all worked for Investigates. We had overlapping time there, and now we've all kind of moved on. Holly's doing show producing for the Daily News. Kathleen's doing the reporting for our website. So I'm happy that we're all here. We can reminisce, but it's a crappy sort of topic that we're talking about here. So these poor women who were very young when they were sent to jail for a crime they didn't commit have been sitting there, rotting in the system basically. For 30 years. Holly, how did this story land on your lap and John Murray's?
Well, the story came to me from a bit of a, sources always overlap when we're on investigative work. And I was asked to provide David Milgaard, of course, wrongly convicted for 23 years for a crime he didn't commit, to assist on a case using a private investigator by the name of Jolene Johnson, who provided the services pro bono. So it first began as, do you have Jolene's contact information? And then quickly, as I was getting the details of the case, it turned into, oh no, this is a huge story. So I worked with Mr. Milgaard, I worked with Jolene Johnson, Senator Kim Pate, who is known.
She's so
amazing.
Yeah.
Had known the women from the time they had gone in to the penitentiary. And so I worked with this core group and did a bunch of research. Jolene Johnson was able to secure the transcripts of the trial. So this is a 28-year transcript. I went through the transcripts. I realized that there was no physical evidence tying Odelia to the crime. She was definitely there.
Yeah.
And there were a number of things that were just jumping out to me in terms of Saskatchewan at the time. The fact that when I did subsequent research, there were a number of murders of non-Indigenous men by groups of Indigenous people within the same area. And I just thought, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And so I worked through the spring. I brought on John Murray that fall, end of summer, and we went out to Keeseekoose with Rob Smith and started to really dig into what had happened.
Geez, this is, because of this story, that APTN Investigates broke. This wasn't somewhere else, right? APTN Investigates broke this. And then since then, in the past year, people have been coming out of the woodwork going, what the hell? Wanting to help, wanting to be allies for these sisters. Kathleen, what's been happening? You've been busy in the last few weeks on this file. What's kind of the latest?
Well, the latest is they have a lawyer, pro bono, but a very high-profile lawyer, James Lockyer.
Who's joining us later on the show.
Excellent. And so he, he's a defense attorney in Toronto. He's also involved with Innocence Canada. But on his own first, he became a lawyer to the sisters and put in a proposal to Saskatchewan Justice to say, let's substitute their second-degree murder conviction for a manslaughter conviction.
Yeah.
And that surprised a few people. He has his reasons that I'm sure he'll mention, but...
I did. I asked him exactly what that, why not just have them exonerated? And he kind of explains. So we do get into that. But,
yeah.
And I mean, I'm not a law expert, so I don't know why I was questioning it anyways.
Yeah, and it's almost like we're used to that, right? They go right for that. But in this case, he has his reasons. They're good reasons. So then, that same week I wrote that story, then Innocence Canada decided to take their case.
Yeah.
And that helps James Lockyer because they have resources and support and researchers and just their name, the weight of their name to put into the case, right?
Yeah.
That all of a sudden the case has a much higher profile. And I know we're going to get into the numbers later of how many cases Innocence Canada takes on, but what's good for the sisters is that they don't go to the back of the line, I was told. They're going to go to almost the front of the line. Like it's being fast-tracked because they've already spent almost 30 years behind bars.
Do you think, Holly, when you did the story a year ago, we didn't have the baby graves at that point, right? The 215 in Kamloops were found. Do you think that there's more, because previously I would think it's not unfair to say that Canadians kind of look and go, not my circus, not my monkeys. I don't care if there's Indigenous people sitting there rotting in jails. It doesn't bother me. Do you think maybe there's more of an appetite for that now as part of reconciliation? People are looking, going, oh, that is wrong, actually.
I think that in all of my work, there's a deep sense of injustice. And so when I was looking at the Innocence projects, I realized that Indigenous and BIPOC prisoners are not accessing those kind of wrongful conviction resources in the same way that, you know, so even within a system that is not just, the remedy is not just as well.
Yeah.
And so I had known of 1 or 2 wrongful convictions that involved Indigenous people, but the overwhelming number, it's the same thing that we see reflected in society, that Indigenous people and BIPOC people do not have access to those same resources. And so that pissed me off, frankly. I thought, I do remember the Milgard actually brought James Lockyer to our door. And James Lockyer phoned me. I was in my car outside the courts building, and I said, I just gave him the whole story. And he said, "You're convincing me." and I remember thinking, good. Like,
they do exist out there.
Yeah, and certainly Senator Kim Pate has devoted her entire career to the over-incarceration of women in prison, Indigenous women in prison.
She's a saint.
So within all this justice, you know, there is this deep injustice.
Yeah. We have a caller. Robert, are you on the line there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Robert. What did you have to add to our conversation? Thanks for phoning.
What did I have to add?
Yeah, do you have a quick comment you've got to make? We're going to head to a break here quickly, but if you wanted to make a quick comment, we've got time for that.
Well, my comments aren't quick.
Oh.
I get into it. I get into it because... Oh, I'm on the line?
Yeah, you're on TV right now, and we got to go to a break in about 1 minute.
Oh, can you come back to me?
Okay, we'll do that. Hang on the line. We'll go to a break, Robert.
It's going to take more than a minute.
Okay, we'll come right back to you.
All right.
Oh, my God. Oh, sorry, we have to go to a clip here quickly first here. Here's another clip from a life sentence. Take a watch.
Odelia and Nerissa Quewezance came from a tight-knit but troubled family.
Bukum and Mushroom were like the center of the family, so we'd always have gatherings at their place, birthday parties, round dance. You know, it was always just hanging out. Jason was always with us, my cousin, and we were always together. Yeah.
Their mother deserted the family when the kids were young.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. My parents were alcoholics, and I never grew up with my mother. My mother left when I was very young, and my father was the one who co-parented me all my life. He was my big hero.
By the time she's 20 years old, the year Dolff died, Odelia is struggling with substance abuse. That's part of why she went to Dolph's farm that night.
I knew this man had alcohol, or, you know, he sleep with young women for money. And I wish I would have told my lawyer. I tried telling, but I was, you know, there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to say that I couldn't.
By 4 a.m., this was the scene.
Coming into view now is an overturned kitchen table, a part-full case of empty beer bottles. Viewing into the northeast bedroom door, the body of a deceased male lying face down on the carpeted floor.
According to Zerlina, Jason and the girls had two very different reactions to the murder the next morning.
And he was asking everybody, he's making sausages, bacon, eggs. And he's asking people, what do you want? You want scrambled eggs? You want sunny side up and all this?
The sisters were walking from Zelina's house to their grandmother's when RCMP from nearby Kamsack arrested them.
A lot of regrets that I should have made them stay home, you know. I blame myself.
Were charged with second-degree murder. Both women entered pleas of not guilty. Their lawyers told RCMP they would not give statements A justice of the peace determined they should be remanded to Pine Grove Correctional Institution for Women in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Instead, they were kept at the Kamsack detachment, where police obtained several statements.
We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, a confession to this crime from APTN Investigates, they confessed to APTN Investigates. We're going to have that when we come back. Lots more to show you after the break.
Join our conversation now. Call in toll-free at 1-877-647-2786. Like us on Facebook on our APTN News page. Follow or tweet us at APTN InFocus. And send your thoughts to infocus@aptn.ca.
Welcome back. We are talking about two Saulteaux sisters doing nearly 30 years for a crime that they didn't commit. They were with a man who was killed by their then 14-year-old cousin, who admits to that murder. This story was brought to light by APTN Investigates in 2020. There's some updates that we're going to be getting into today. We've discussed a couple of them already. We'll just keep chatting about that. I wanted to go though right now we have a caller, Robert, on the line, who's from this area where this all took place. Robert, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, thanks for holding on for us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so what do you have to add to this?
Okay,
Are you there?
Yeah. Am I speaking to Melissa?
Yes, this is Melissa.
Oh, hi, Melissa.
Hi, Robert.
Okay, so in regards to the legality of what we are speaking on, our people need to understand that we are not Canadian citizens. If you have a treaty card under the Indian Act, it tells you you're an Indian, but it doesn't say anything about citizenship. Mm-hmm. So with regards to being charged with a crime, like these sisters who I know, and from way back when, the current justice system cannot assume jurisdiction when on individuals who do not hold Canadian citizenship.
Yeah, our jails are full of status Indians.
The burden of proof is on the court system to prove that they are not part of a First Nation. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that this government, so-called government, is not really a government because it's a de facto government that took away the real government, which is and still is run by the clan mothers.
Mm. I love it. Well, I'm going to have to cut you off there, Robert. We got to keep moving here, but we stay tuned because we're going to talk to a lawyer and a retired judge later on in the show. I think what they have to say might interest you as well. We're here in the studio with Holly Moore and Kathleen Martins. They've been working. Holly worked on the original story. Kathleen's been working on these follow-up stories. So interesting. We were talking before the break about the Innocence Project taking this on, and there seems to be. We were wondering maybe. Is there more interesting cases like this now because of the graves being discovered and there's interest in reconciliation? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, these sisters are residential school survivors. Yeah. I mean, Odelia went to one of the worst in Saskatchewan. She was abused by a nun. Nerissa was abused in her residential school. She got one of the highest payouts that you can get for pain and suffering under the Indian residential school settlement. So having spent time with these sisters, the fact that they ended up in jail is not shocking or surprising. Mm-hmm. And when you delve into their childhood, though there were some bright spots in their family, they suffered from alcoholism, mm-hmm. abuse, drug abuse, trafficking. I mean, the jail part is the end of a system that failed them from birth.
Yeah.
And so if Canadians are going to get serious about reconciliation, there should be many more investigations that look at why people ended up in jail. The work that Kim Pate is doing is essential. Why are there dangerous offenders? Why are people fighting violence with violence? Women are often defending themselves in violent situations, but they take on the guilt of a nation. And so there's parts of me that just, I'm aghast. I'm aghast that when we did this story, there wasn't an immediate outcry from mainstream Canada. I mean, they're certainly catching up now, you know, with all the advocacy that's been going on and the Facebook Live. They should have walked out of jail the next day.
I forgot about the Facebook Live with Odelia.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
And so, you know, Odelia is lucky in the sense that she has a number of people rooting for her. So David Milgaard organized a Facebook Live where Odelia went on screen and cut her hair and held it up and said, "This is my truth."
Yeah.
You know, Nerissa, they're lucky in the sense that these stories surfaced. But for every Odelia and Nerissa, there are a dozen
that nobody knows
that
of.
nobody knows about.
Yeah.
Men, women laboring under long sentences that are not appropriate.
Yeah.
And they've never even come to light.
Yeah. You know, I was going to ask you, Kathleen, I mean, you've been in this business for 3 decades, you know, how many of these kind of have you come across? Are they hard stories to tell? How many do you think there are out there? I mean, like, are we talking like dozens of people sitting in jails, hundreds of people, thousands of people sitting in jails doing time that doesn't fit the crime or that they were wrongly convicted of? I mean, I don't know who's paying attention to this.
I know, I don't know those figures. I can tell you that they've decided, the federal government wants to create this miscarriage of justice commission.
Yes.
And it builds on this wrongful conviction work. And in the last 20 years, 20 cases have been referred back to the courts for a new trial or appeal. That's about 1 per year.
Yeah.
And 18 of those were white men, white males. 1 was an Indigenous man and 1 was a black man.
Okay.
None were women. And that's 20 years. And that's how, that's people who've already appealed as far as they can and may not know that they can then apply directly to the Justice Minister for this next step. So this commission just wrapped up, a bunch of meetings wrapped up, run by Harry Laforme, the retired judge who we're going to hear from later.
Yeah.
And he's passionate about this commission being created independent of government to help people of color, especially women. Yeah. They, as Holly said earlier, they are just not accessing what's available to them. And then Innocence Canada told me last week they have 90 cases on their desk. They're maybe going to get to 50 some in the next couple of years. Like they keep getting applications every year. They have, I quizzed them, have you had Indigenous women before, like these Quewezance sisters? They think so.
Are they too new to know if they're successful at getting people out or finding some amount of justice? Do we know? Or is it still too early?
24 exonerees that that are posted on their website.
Okay.
And again, women, if you ask Senator Kim Pate, women don't apply because women say things to themselves like, "Oh, I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have been drunk.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have." There's an
Internalize.
internalizing of guilt. And so when you look at those, those are shocking statistics.
So gross.
I mean, out of 90.
Yeah, and that's like this in the last year. Like they received this many applications. They can maybe take 50, and you can imagine the stacks of boxes they get of information. Their researchers have to go through it all, and then they have to find, you know, that hook to help get them out. It's not always super clear. They're very complex cases, right? Just like this one, you know, you can't get a transcript.
Well, this one I do question, if not for the cousin admitting to murdering this guy, would this be, I mean, this might get bogged down, right?
Yeah.
Without that, he confessed on
He
TV.
confessed
On
to
TV.
us.
To
Yeah,
TV on,
he confessed to us.
They had to capture, that was like the trigger, the lever.
Yeah.
That sort of got it moving forward, right? Once you had that confession, then that cleared the women in a way, right?
Yeah.
And in a sense, I mean, he did confess in the transcripts as well, but maybe we should look at that clip where
let's take a look.
Where he confesses.
Do we have, this is Jason, the cousin.
Jason Cushane.
Jason Cushane, sorry. I don't know if this is the one that he's confessing. I think we have that one too, but he's talking about the fiasco of a trial. That's right.
Yeah.
And then we'll show you the confessing one after that.
Okay.
Is this the Arlie's? Here, I'll shut your door for you. Oh, you got it? Oh, they got one spark. Yeah, I would have been just...
Hey, guys. Hey. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Get over here.
Are Odelia and Nerissa innocent?
I can pretty say much so, yeah.
Yeah?
Very much so, yeah. When I went to court that time, the judge didn't say anything or listened to what I had to say. He just heard my testimony and sent me on my way, and then you were found guilty of it, you know? First few times I didn't say anything. I lied. I said I wasn't there and stuff like that, you know? The second time I said I was there, but I left before everything happened. And the third time I said I fessed up to what I did. Because as a kid, you're scared and stuff like that. You're worried and what's going to happen. And
Do you think they should be free?
yeah, I think so. I know so, you know, coming from me.
Do you have anything to say that would help set them free?
I'm not too sure that I did everything. I don't know what I can say, but I did the other one. I did it all. I stabbed him and beat him up. Because he was a fierce man. Put it that way, right? All right.
Thank you very
You
much.
bet.
All right. Very much. Thank you.
Yep. Once we get home, everything will go back.
Yeah. We could be a family.
Crazy moment for Investigates. Well, we have to take another break, and then we're going to come back with the lawyer who's fighting for them and a retired judge who's fighting for women and people of color, just like the Quewezance sisters. Before we go, I want to say thank you for coming on our show. We bring treats.
Thanks.
This is probably the last time I'm going to see you before Christmas, so I wanted to make sure to spread some joy. Okay, we have to take a break now. Thanks for coming on here with us. Stay with us. Got lots more. We'd mentioned Odelia's family before the break. She's really fortunate to have just an incredible partner who stood by her for 30 years. He makes frequent visits to see her in jail, and he's raising their daughters. I want to take a look at a clip from a life sentence, just so you could take a peek inside the family that's awaiting for her to get out of jail.
After the verdict was read, a lot of the people in here were like, just couldn't believe it, you know. And like a lot of her family that was here. I think she looked more scared than anything.
Odelia remembers that verdict like it was yesterday.
I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never, ever get out of prison. And I also told Jay, I'm never getting out. You might as well move on.
But Jay has stood by her.
Well, it's important for me to uncover what really happened.
I got it when I was like 3 months old.
My kids need their mother. I mean, like we have twin girls that are 13 years old now, and they need to be with their mother and have guidance from their mother.
Like, I wouldn't guess that that was me when I was a kid.
Daughter Haley grew up behind bars with her mom until she was 2.
I grew up with my mom in the system, you know, going from healing lodges to correctional facilities and whatnot. And so I grew up in the environment at the healing lodge where she was allowed to have me there and kind of be able to be my mom while she was still doing her, like, time.
She's now 21.
Yeah, she
I got
and
that
like
picture
slow.
somewhere
Of what?
of the dog
Oh.
walking around at your feet. Yeah.
She seemed sleepy and like I didn't want a jumpy dog. And then we got home and she was just so hyper.
All these years, I was a phone mother. Phone my kids every day, twice a day. You know what? My kids still love me too. We still have that deep bond. My kids are safe today, and I have a wonderful partner, Jay. Takes good care of me, and he believes in me. And he's been by my side since forever. I met him 30 years ago, and we've been together 24 years. Stuck by my side. I'm so very grateful for him. You know, he believes in me. He took care of our daughters. And I honestly believe I broke that cycle with my daughters.
Oh, of course.
Jay still believes there was a miscarriage of justice, and he's been talking to anyone who will listen.
Her family wants her out, and there's a growing number of people fighting to make sure that that happens, including lawyer James Lockyer, who I spoke to yesterday, along with retired Judge Harry Laforme, Canada's first First Nations judge. He's a Anishinaabe and a member of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. Laforme and Juanita Westmoreland Traore, I believe is how you say her last name. She is Black. They have been tapped by the Liberal government to head a criminal convictions review looking for Indigenous and Black offenders who are lost in the system, just like these Quewezance sisters. Either doing too much time for a crime or being wrongly convicted. This in response to the severe, of course, overrepresentation of BIPOC people in prisons in Canada. Here's a conversation that I had with the judge, former judge and lawyer yesterday. You know, Harry and James, I'm really appreciative that you could join us here today. This is, of course, you know, an issue that there's lots that's gone on in the past 30 years and lots that has developed rather recently with regards to the Quewezance sisters in Saskatchewan. And you both have a very interesting perspective on this case in particular, you, James, and then more broadly, just kind of the systemic things, Mr. Laforme. So I'm glad you guys can join us and we can chat about all those things. You know, James, you've taken up the cause for Odelia and Nerissa, these two sisters who were convicted of second-degree murder nearly 30 years ago. You know, what led you to this case now?
Well, actually, it was APTN. They were doing a documentary on their case, and your reporter, Mr. Murray, called me and asked me to comment on a few things about their case, and as well, David Milgaard, who himself was a victim of Saskatchewan justice, knew about the case and spoke to me about it.
You know, Mr. Laforme, you're a retired judge. This case you also know about. You've written to you and Juanita Westmoreland Traore have become involved in this. You've written to the Parole Board of Canada, just kind of on behalf of these sisters, saying perhaps it's time to set them free. What landed this case on your radars?
Well, of course, what landed it on our radar was the fact that we were undergoing and in the process of doing consultations on behalf of the Minister of Justice on what an independent process would look like to address issues of wrongful conviction and miscarriage of justice. And the Quewezance sisters are like sort of poster people for, you know, a miscarriage of justice, or at least the circumstances that give rise to that.
Yeah. Mr. Lockyer, you've petitioned to Saskatchewan Justice to reduce the second-degree murder conviction to manslaughter. You know, they've served all of this time. Just to us lay people out here who don't understand, what would be the meaning or the intent behind having it reduced from second-degree murder conviction to manslaughter? Does it help how would it help these sisters now?
Well, if the convictions were changed to manslaughter, they'd be released immediately with no state restrictions like parole or anything on them. They'd be able to start trying to live their lives again after all these years. I mean, Nerissa was 19 when she went into jail. She's now 47. Odelia was 21. She's now 49, turning 50. And it's really quite dreadful how long they've been in prison for what was at best a peripheral involvement in the murder of Mr. Dolff. It's never been alleged that they were the primary perpetrators of the murder. And yet the actual perpetrator of the murder spent something like 4 years in jail and has been out ever since. And he's not even on parole. And here are the two sisters are still in jail all these years later.
How does, I mean, if this system works, how does this happen?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the whole issue with the way we've treated the Indigenous in our justice system. Their treatment by the RCMP, in my view, left a great deal to be desired. Whether that can be attributed to systemic racism or not, I suppose will never be known, but pretty good reason to think it was. And then the justice system itself sort of jammed them through a trial and got them convicted in a province that where the systemic issues involving Indigenous is probably the most extreme in that province, Saskatchewan. And then having been convicted and given life sentences and required to spend at least 10 years before they're eligible for parole, they now get caught up in that parole system.
Yeah, it's like a leg hold trap, right?
Which itself is well known for the systemic racism it shows towards the Indigenous. So here we have the two sisters. They're part of the 30% of our prison population that's Indigenous. And they're part of, I don't know what the percentages is, but a substantial part of our prison population who are regularly mistreated by the parole board and the parole authorities. And their prospects with these murder convictions is really they're going to spend the rest of their lives in and out of jail.
Mm-hmm. You know, Harry, this is an incredible case, but it does, as James just said, you know, it begs the question of how many other of these cases are out there. I mean, we know that the system does feeds on, the industry feeds on keeping Indigenous people in the system, incarcerated or on parole. You are part of this criminal conviction review board. Many of us had not heard of this. Can you tell us what it is, who it helps, how it came to be, what your role is there, and what we can expect from, or what would hopefully be the outcome of having a board like this?
Yeah, how it works right now is there's, in the criminal code, there's a prerogative to the Minister of Justice that where people believe that they have been wrongfully convicted, and while the section itself talks about miscarriages of justice, that isn't really how the process works. So the minister has his own group put together, and they call themselves the Criminal Convictions Review Group. And what they do is they take any applications by people who feel that they've had a miscarriage of justice in this particular case, and how it's functioned for the last 20 years, is to really look at it from the wrongful conviction standpoint. And that is, they want to look to an applicant who's in prison, and they want to find and believe that there exists evidence to prove factual innocence. The miscarriage of justice component that the minister has really doesn't, I mean, it doesn't mean anything in the criminal code because nobody really approaches it from that context. Miscarriages of justice can include what Jim has just talked about in our view, the study that we undertook. So we wanted to put this in place. We were asked and tasked with the the job of trying to tell the minister or explain to the minister what this independent body, separate from government, that would take over that ministerial, what they call crown prerogative, that the minister has to be able to release people and declare them, have a court declare them exonerated because the evidence, the new evidence, demonstrates that they didn't do it. Well, we think there are many things that's the task we were functioned with. We were to give recommendations as to what that commission or independent body would look like, what its mandate would be, and what it could consider and put forward. We thought wrongful convictions based on factual innocence, because that factual innocence usually comes by way of DNA, right? And not all cases turn on DNA. What James described was a circumstance where issues like systemic racism within the criminal justice system, and we all know those are real.
Right.
The Supreme Court of Canada said this way back in 1999 in the case of Gladue, and it's been carried out ever since. Commissions of inquiry, like in Donald Marshall's case, for example, and others since then, have found over and over and over again, continuously, that things like systemic racism, particularly for Indigenous people and Black accused, exists. That is a reality. And we believe that that's part of the miscarriage of justice that should be examined to see if these people, not only if they've committed a crime, but have they actually been convicted of the crime? And I would say that's what's going to the point that James is making. Have those sisters actually ever been convicted of the crime that they, if they did anything at all, was it correct? I mean, they 30 years in jail for being in the premises where it occurred strikes me, being Indigenous women, is an issue that is capable of being examined for a miscarriage of justice with all that we know about the justice system and Indigenous people.
So as a former judge, and you're still involved, in these, examining these convictions, what could the lawmakers, what could the policymakers do, provincially, federally, what could we do? We're at a time of reconciliation. This should be, a key component of reconciliation, one would think, would be stop jailing Indigenous people
wrongly and indefinitely. What could be done? What should be done?
Well, a lot. And the recommendations that we make for this commission spell all of that out. And I mean, it would take me at least the rest of the afternoon to tell everybody what that is. But I can tell you that one of the things that happens, I know of circumstances in northern remote Indigenous communities, and courthouses in those areas and the prosecutors themselves. You'll see somebody, for example, who's traumatized from residential school, maybe in their 50s, has a couple of children, committing petty crimes, and their list of offenses when they get arrested is about 15 charges long. Now, how is it that you get one who's got 15 charges on their indictment? They go waltz into the courtroom and the Crown says, we'll take a plea of guilty to all of this, and you'll only have to serve the time that you've spent in waiting for prison, like 3 months.
Right.
Waiting for your trial. Now, how does something like 16 charges against an Indigenous woman who barely understands English, her first language is Ojibwe or Cree, traumatized by residential school, waltz into court and have to plead guilty to 16 offenses? There's something wrong. If you wonder why our prisons are overrepresented by Indigenous people, that's part of it. That's the systemic part of it that needs to be, and that's not just systemic racism, that's just an overt wrongful way in which the justice system works.
Yeah.
And it does that overtly.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Another thing that always struck me as a young reporter, I covered courts for a long time when I was living in Kenora, Ontario. So as you can imagine, that chunk of Northern Ontario, it's primarily Indigenous people that are coming in, charged with offences, and their criminal records, while they're so long, the actual crimes committed were fairly, like that was just a scrape the tip of the iceberg. Most of the crimes and convictions were for breaching conditions, right? So your record just becomes
absolutely
not listening to the court.
That's right.
And that always struck me as a little bit bizarre. So my last
question. It's bizarre and wrong.
Well, and maybe it's not bizarre, might be the wrong choice of word, because I think that from listening to you, the system knows what it's doing, right? So it's not bizarre. They know what they're doing. It's intent. There's intent behind it, right?
Absolutely.
James, my last question will be for you. What can you tell us in terms of what's going on with the sisters? What's an update for them? Are they back in court anytime soon? Is there any kind of good news on the horizon for them, do you think?
There's no court. They were dealt with by the courts finally 27, 28 years ago. I have written to Saskatchewan Justice, which is the Attorney General's office essentially in Saskatchewan, and asked them to consider joining me in having their murder convictions quashed and manslaughter convictions substituted. I was a bit tortured about this because arguably, if I went through the ministerial review process that Harry just spoke about, I would actually be arguing one step higher, that their convictions be quashed and acquittals be entered. But I don't expect, I felt in advance that Saskatchewan Justice won't agree to that. Right. And the ministerial review process is very, very slow.
Very slow.
But if I can get Saskatchewan Justice to agree now to quash their convictions and substitute manslaughters, I could have them out this winter and free of all restraints. So I spoke to Nerissa and to Odelia, and they've agreed that we should take this route. It's not entirely satisfactory, but surely what we as a society should be doing is getting them out of jail. That's the primary job here, is to have them back out in the community, living their lives before they get too old. They're already, middle-aged, and heavens knows how long a ministerial review application would take place. If Saskatchewan Justice says, no, we're not prepared to do anything, then I'll have to bring a ministerial review application, which I will do. But
hopefully
I'm trying
before
to
an
bypass
independent,
that slow process.
Yeah, hopefully before an independent commission at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what James is describing is classic. I mean, how does one make that kind of a decision? They've spent 30 years in prison, the sisters, as an example, and you're offering them perhaps freedom and out of prison in the wintertime. How do you make that decision to say, when you know that and believe in your heart you did not commit a crime?
Yeah.
And yet those are the kinds of solutions to your problem that you're faced with. That's got to be real torture for people.
Yeah. Well, I thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us today and shedding some light on this and just the system more broadly. I'm going to keep both of you in my prayers for you to both continue having strength to carry on this work. I just have so much admiration for you, and there's so many more people to be out there to be helped, and I will keep praying for strength for both of you to stay on this path and plow through.
Miigwech.
Marseille. Here's one more clip from A Life Sentence before we leave. Final thoughts on the case go to Odelia's partner, who refuses to give up, waiting for justice to finally be served.
And Odelia and her family keep waiting and hoping.
Like I say, we need resolution. She needs to come home.
Haley says she doesn't see Odelia's side of the family much.
I still talk to most of my aunts, and I talk to my cousins as much as I can, but growing up there definitely was that wedge where I didn't have the connection because my mom wasn't there to make the connection.
Well, growing up, we all shared the same bed at my grandparents' place, so.
And Odelia's sister Zerlina echoes that.
They missed out on so much, everything that happened in this home, in this yard, you know. All the birthday parties and Christmases that we all shared with the family and get-togethers. And we missed them. We always said, oh, Odelia and Nerissa should have been here. The sisters, I always said, should have been here. So it's really had a big impact on our lives. Big impact. It hurt me a lot, you know.
Throughout it all, Odelia still has a lot of empathy for Dolff and his family.
I continue to pray for him and his family. I apologize for what has happened to him. I still continue to pray though for him and his family. Nobody deserves to die like that. But I didn't kill him.
Well, we are all out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Melissa Ridgen. We're going to see you back here next week with a hugely entertaining holiday show showcasing singing and dancing talents of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I promise you, you do not want to miss that. Until then, have a great afternoon.